皆さんどうも、Music is a Journey のピーター・スコーバです。今日は人間にすの歴史についてアルバムバイアルバムという話を続けます。あれごめん。ちょっと待っててくださいね。言語設定が... There! Sorry about that. I had the language settings on Japanese. So, yes, it's Peter Skov for Music is a Journey. Today we are continuing our history of Ningen Isu album by album, talking about what happened behind the scenes of the making of each album, which I'm getting basically from this book, plus a couple of other sources, including a little bit from here and Wikipedia in Japanese, plus wherever else I pick up something. Let's do a quick recap. Alright, so Ningen Isu signed to the label Meldak. They released 4 albums. After the 3rd album, they lost their drummer. They got Masahiro Goto to come in and play drums for the 4th album. After that, their contract with Meldak finished up. There was a compilation album released. Then they were on their own. They got a new drummer. They released 1 album on an indie label. And then by a stroke of luck, they were contacted by a manga artist who wanted to do a collaboration with them. And they got signed to Pony Canyon for a 1-album deal. After that, their new drummer also left, and they called Masahiro Goto to come back and help them out with the next album, Taihai Geijitsu, which was also an indie release. After that, Meldak called them back again. Masahiro Goto decided to stay on as the permanent drummer, and we're going to take the conversation from there. So, Ningen Isu were back with Meldak, and Wajima says that it was better for their back catalog to be with the same company again. Now, Wajima and Suzuki had been living in Hirosaki, up in Aomori, and been working there, having part-time jobs. Wajima in particular said he found it kind of difficult because if he continued working like everybody else, he would become basically one of them, I guess. It was something like they were the hardworking people of the countryside, and he apologized that he felt he didn't want to kind of become exactly a part of that for some reason. He mentioned something that in the book anyway, which was kind of okay, I see. So anyway, he got married at that time and moved off to Chiba Prefecture, which is neighboring Tokyo. And so he had a small place to stay there with his wife, and he could easily commute into Tokyo. Now, Masahiro Goto had become a member of the band, full-time member from the previous album, and he was also with another band called Gerard. Gerard used Studio Triad, and Ningen Isu were also permitted to use the same studio. They got a kind of, I think, discount rate or something. Now, they didn't really have any material ready for the new album, and it was a little bit difficult to think of things, so the best idea was to come up with a theme first. And as the 20th century was coming to a close, it was now 1999, they decided to go with Nijuu Seiki Sousoukyoku, which is basically Requiem for the 20th century. And once they had that idea, then they started coming up with the songs. Now, for the front cover, you can see here anyway, they went to a museum that exhibits torture devices from the past. And on the cover here, Wajima is kneeling down on a board with what appears to be 3 slabs of stone across his lap. Actually, the 3 slabs of stone were polystyrene foam. However, the board was a jagged board with serrated indentations. So kneeling on there, just kneeling on it, he could feel it digging into his flesh. And he was very uncomfortable, but he said the photographer, who was assigned from Meldak, wouldn't let him up until he got the shot. So he said, I was basically sweating bullets down there in pain and in discomfort, and he wouldn't let me go. And Suzuki said, well, you know, maybe he was trying to go for that realistic look and wanted that expression on your face. Yeah, I can't really see it so much in here, but anyway. Okay, let's see here. They still had some of their familiar old problems while recording the album. Once again, Wajima was as always, a bit delayed in coming up with the lyrics, and it seems to me that he is not ready to show up for work until he has everything ready. he doesn't want to show up on time and not have everything ready. So instead he just shows up late with everything ready. And Suzuki said one time they were sitting around waiting and they thought, well, you know what, let's just record the drums and bass first. And then when Wajima gets here, we can add the guitars in. But they found that was actually really difficult to do, to try to make the guitars fit in with the drums and bass. So it was really better to record the three of them together. However, if Wajima didn't come, then basically the studio staff just sat around staring at the ceiling, according to Suzuki in the book here. Okay, they also released a video for the song Yurei Resha. That video was filmed near the foot of Mount Fuji in an old train, and both Masahiro Goto and Kenichi Suzuki were really excited about it because they both are kind of train buffs. So, okay, so one thing that was also pretty cool, they said coming back to Meldak now, after having been away, basically they had grown as a band, and Meldak cut them a little bit more slack. A lot of things that were said early on in the career, some direction they had been given, those kinds of things weren't said anymore. Basically, Ningen Isu had blossomed, and Meldak were just happy with that. This idea of coming up with a concept first really worked for the band, and so for their final album of the 20th century, because technically the year 2000 is the last year of the 20th century, they came up with an idea using the number 20, Kaijin Niju Menso, which is the Fiend of 20 Faces, a character that appeared in some of the stories by their favorite author, Edogawa Rampo Edogawa. Reverse. Anyway, so the artwork on the cover here was done once more by Kotaro Koshi. Kotaro Koshi? Yes, that's right. He was the same person who did the artwork for Ogo no Yoake, their third album, as well as the person who created the figure on the cover of the Odoru Isunboshi album. The three band members are featured here. Of course, Kenichi Suzuki is the Fiend of 20 Faces, and Shinji Wajima is the detective, and then a young boy named Kobayashi in the story is depicted here with the face of Masahiro Goto. Yeah, they went ahead to do the video for this, and Wajima recounts that it was really hard because some of the scenes were filmed in the studio with the band performing, and then some of the scenes were filmed outside where they were showing the story going on in the video of the Fiend of 20 Faces. Fiend with 20 Faces. And he said normally what you would do is you would spend one day shooting in the studio and then you would spend one day shooting outside. But they went ahead and shot the whole thing in one day, all locations. And he said it was just a really long, tiring day. Suzuki's comment was that at that time he was just still slim enough to fit in the costume and play the part of the Fiend with 20 Faces. And he said now he has simply gained too much weight to do so. I mean, have you ever seen a fat fiend? Now, Wajima tells some stories of some rather strange occurrences that happened during the recording. One such story, he was at home practicing working on a demo guitar solo, and out of the corner of his eye off to the right he saw a woman, and he thought, oh, my wife has come home from work early today. But when he looked over in that direction, she was gone. Oh, anyway, he went back to practicing or working on his demo, and then again he thought, there's a woman smiling at me off to the right, and he looked again, but there was no one. And then shortly after that, suddenly he looked and saw his grandmother standing there wearing kimono. And he later on found out that exactly at that time his grandmother had passed away. Twilight Zone music, anybody? Then another incident he talks about, he had this dream that a friend of theirs, an acquaintance named Aima, Mr. Aima, he was a guitar effects device, effects pedals fanatic. And so in the dream, Mr. Akima came up to Wajima and said, Wajima, I have a really great idea for an effects device for your guitar. You should use this. Anyway, next day he went off to the studio, and there was Suzuki talking to Akima, Mr. Akima, and then Akima came up to Wajima and said, Wajima, I have this really great idea for an effects device for your guitar. Yeah, so he says that during the recording of this album, there were a few bizarre cases like this. Okay. The main song off here, other than the title track, is Emo Mushi. This is a song written by Kenichi Suzuki. He is particularly proud of this song, and he says it was his effort to try to combine Wishbone Ash with Pink Floyd. I didn't think about that when I heard it, but I do think it's a brilliant song. Really cool stuff there. Great solo in there, by the way, by Wajima. At this point in the book, Wajima makes a comment about the final song, Daidan-en, and he says they worked really hard on it, and especially the latter half, he was having a difficult time with the riff. I'm not exactly sure why, but he said it was very difficult, and basically he just really forced himself to try to get it right. So in the end, they thought we made a really strong effort on that song. However, a fan, I guess, had written, or told him anyway, that that song was rather lackluster. And he said, I felt really shocked because, we worked so hard on that. And then at that point, Suzuki comes in and he says, well, after we did Isunboshi, Odoro Isunboshi album, he thought, yeah, this album is full 100 points. And then some fan wrote and said, you know what, this last album, it's like 35 points. And Suzuki said, I was totally shocked. And from there on, the conversation goes to, you cannot let yourself be influenced. As an artist, a creative artist, you cannot let yourself be influenced by the opinions of other people, even your fans. If you have a vision, have an idea for something, and you work very hard to create it, there will be people that will like it. If you are being very honest in your creation, honest with yourself, you will attract fans who will like it. Not everybody's going to like it, but you cannot let the opinions of other people affect your ego. Wajima talks about an ego search, which I guess basically, yeah, you can imagine. You start trying to find the place of your ego in rather than putting your creativity and your efforts towards creating music first. And that is a kind of maze that you can get trapped in, which maybe many artists do. So back in those days, the internet was still in its kind of infancy. It wasn't really all that strong. But Wajima says that even now he doesn't like to read reviews or any critiques of their albums or performances on the internet because he does not want to let other people's opinions influence his creative style. Okay. Kaiji Niju Menso, the final album of the 20th century by Ningen Isu. Okay, the first album of the 21st century, Mishiranu Sekai. Wajima came up with the idea for this album. Well, I guess you have to go back and tell a little bit about his personal life. And actually, I was hesitant to mention things about his personal life in the video, but it seems that what happened is important to the background of this album here. So, what happened was he got divorced. And his reason for it, he said, was he was living in Chiba. And I mentioned previously, when they lived in Aomori, he had this aversion to working along with the local people. It seemed he had this idea that he didn't want to become one of them exactly. No offense to them, but just it was his personal feeling that he didn't want to kind of get settled into that life, I guess. And so he had the same feeling while they were living in Chiba. So he didn't have a part-time job. His wife worked, and then basically he said she was supporting me. Of course they had money coming in from Ningen Isu, but they weren't selling a heck of a lot of albums. So he said she was supporting me. And meanwhile, Suzuki was off living on his own, working part-time, taking care of himself, supporting himself. And after a while, Wajima started to feel this situation is not right. I'm basically letting her spoil me or letting myself be spoiled, and it's not fair to her, and it's not good for me. So he made the decision to divorce and move off and start life again on his own. And I almost kind of wonder this, album cover here, which shows this very sparsely furnished room, just a single armchair, a television in the background, and a lamp on the floor. I wonder if this is almost like a reflection of his new life, because he said he moved into a small apartment to start his new life there. Now, the reason why this is important towards the album is because he said they started the new century and he started the new life, and basically there are so many unknowns. What's going to happen? And so this is the unknown world, the Mishiranu Sekai. And the title actually comes from a poem by Yumeji Takehisa. Yumeji Takehisa wrote a poem many years ago called Mishiranu Sekai. So this new life, this new beginning really inspired him, and it seemed the whole band was just really on fire for writing songs. And so this album here is their first album to include 13 songs. Most of their albums actually usually include around 12 or fewer, but this was the first album to hit 15. And one of the things they felt, or especially Wajima said, you should just write what you want to write. Write the songs you want and never mind what other people have to say about it, because when you write a lot and you put them out on an album, you are bound to have a good bunch of songs. Not everyone's going to like everything, so not every single track is going to be a hit, but you'll have a bunch of good songs that'll make people happy with the album. You can be happy with the album. Some of the songs are not particularly that heavy, and in fact, Wajima does have a kind of Beatles influence sometimes. And so it was that some people at Meldak said, this song isn't really Ningen Isu's style though. You can't put that on the album. But went ahead and did it anyway. I think it was the one song there, Amai Kotoba Warui Nakama was one of those songs. But Suzuki backed him up and said, look, as long as we have some of the typical heavy Ningen Isu songs on the album, then to have some other stuff on there is fine. Led Zeppelin did the same, and they had their heavy tracks on most of their albums, but they also had songs that were not all that heavy, and even did one song that was, reggae, Suzuki points out. So, let's see here. They made a video for the title track, which was shot in the forest area around Mount Fuji. It is a vast forest area, and that area is actually famous for people going in to commit suicide. This actually came up not that long ago. YouTuber Logan Paul came to Japan, and one of the things they did was, his group did, was to go into that forest with the idea that they were going to look to see if they could find any bodies. And I think they took it rather lightly, but the thing was they actually did find a body. And Logan Paul later on said, I really didn't know what to do about it. We were kind of scared, but they ended up making a joke out of it, probably because they were scared and didn't know what to do. However, that's what they put out on the video, and that gave a really bad impression and basically put his whole YouTube career off for a while anyway. So yeah, Ningen Isu, they went in there to record their video. They didn't find any bodies. However, Wajima says that at one point while he was walking in the forest, he swears he distinctly heard a human cry, a voice crying out, and he went and asked the others, hey, did you guys hear that? And nobody's heard anything. And Suzuki, in the interview in the book, he says, why do these things always seem to happen to you? So who knows, maybe Wajima has a kind of sixth sense for this kind of thing. So they put on a new costume at this time here, and you know how Shinji Wajima's costume turned out. He has that gold space suit type of thing with the pack on the back and the hose and the German war helmet on. And I think he was inspired by some Spanish character, and his space character was called the Ummo Starman. Now there's one thing here I want to point out, because when I was first listening to this album, there's a song on here called Shizenji, and I thought when I heard Shizenji, man, I know that song. They have borrowed the riff from that song. As it turns out, they didn't. However, just listen to this one part here. Let me cue it up. Hear this. Okay, so that's Ningen Isu's Shizenji. Now let me just cue up the other part of the other track, the other song I'm thinking of. Okay, this one here. Alright, it is very different. It is a different riff altogether, but the basic, I don't know, the pace, the sound of the guitars, and I almost feel you could sing the chorus to Shizenji over this. This is Red by King Crimson. And the reason why I'm just playing it off the phone is because I understand King Crimson, I don't know, Robert Fripp, or the company that has the rights to the distribution of their music, they're very sensitive about having King Crimson music put on YouTube. I've heard of some people having their videos blocked because they even use just samples of songs. So I'm playing it off my phone. I hope that does something. But anyway, King Crimson are a big influence to of Ningen Isu, so maybe it's no surprise. There are a couple of other songs of theirs as well that have something that I think that sounds like King Crimson. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but on Ogo no Yoake, in the song Heisei Asaborake, there's one part in there that actually uses the riff from Led Zeppelin's The Rover off the Physical Graffiti album. And then the song later on, the song Yuki Onna, it uses part of Led Zeppelin's Achilles' Last Stand. And it's not just that they used the riff and the drumming, even the lead guitar notes basically sound like a slice of those songs. So Ningen Isu do pay their pay homage to their idols, and you could say the same for Black Sabbath as well, right? Maybe especially Black Sabbath. Okay, so I think, yeah, that brings us to the first album in the 21st century of Ningen Isu, Mishiranu Sekai. This brings us up to Shurabayashi. It's very difficult to explain the background to this because I was taking a look what Shura means, and it does have a Buddhist connection, but it is related to some demigods called the Asura, who were kicked out of heaven during a party where they drank too much. I tried to figure out how this actually related to what Ningen Isu were up to, what they were trying to say, because there were some other meanings as well as I checked the meaning of the word. But the Hayashi part here as Asura, as Shura Bayashi, but actually Hayashi, it's exactly what you see here. This three-piece band, there's a drummer, someone beating a drum, and two other people playing instruments. These you can see at some festivals or markets or whatever in Japan. This is a kind of common thing. So this is what they did. They all dressed up in costume. Suzuki particularly wanted to have chommage. That's the kind of Japanese style with the shaved middle part of the head and then the long hair kind of folded over like this. But all the chommage wigs just didn't fit his head. He said they were all a bit too tight and uncomfortable. Shinji Wajima, he went for the very female look, and he said basically he was inspired by Freddie Mercury in I Want to Break Free in the Queen video, where he dresses up as a woman. So here he is dressed up very female-like, but with the mustache. Now, since they returned to the Meldak label, they were allowed to make one video for each of their albums. So the song they did a video for here is Toyo no Majo, the Oriental Witch. Oh yeah, sorry, it was actually in that video, anyway, based on this image here, and that's where Suzuki said he wanted to have the chommage, but ended up just going with his long black hair down like that. Now, there's a curious dialogue going on in here. I think I'm going to interject right now and say, of the last four albums, this one and the three previous ones, this one's actually my favorite. And the reason why is because Suzuki has a lot of songs on here, and that means there are a lot of really good, heavy songs. And I thought that was really great. Plus, I like some of the songs that Wajima's doing. Just overall, I find this to be a very enjoyable album. As I go through track by track thinking, okay, how much do I like this track, whatever, I find this one has the most of the previous three, including this one here, 4 albums. Anyway, Suzuki goes on to say that he was actually very disappointed with his songwriting. He wrote 4 of the songs, means he wrote lyrics and music for 4 of the tracks on here, and he says he's just not happy with that. Previously, he thought, if I wrote 3 of the songs on the album, that was pretty good. But he said after this album, he felt, nah, I should be writing only 1 song. So Wajima interjects here and says, but look at a song like Oni. that is a song that only you could write. You have the way of putting in that atmosphere and the words together. If I had written it, it would have been something very different. And Suzuki says, yeah, okay, Oni is a good example. It's a good one, but take, for example, what is it? Jasei no in, which basically is like a serpent arousal or something like this. He said, I really like the music. I like that track, but the lyrics are lacking. He uses the word imaichi, which in Japanese means lackluster or leaving something to be desired. And Wajima concurs. He said, well, okay, yeah, Jasei no in, maybe that was a song I should have taken a look at. So Suzuki goes on to say, like, after he wrote a couple of songs like that, where he's really disappointed in his lyrics, he says you see where the balance in the band is. You see where the gold comes from, is his words. And the gold meaning the songs that are going to be the ones that are going to be on, like the hits, I guess, the greatest hits or whatever, the best of Ningen Isu. I don't know. Once again, I liked it. I like his songs on here. And I guess it's because for me, I don't look at the lyrics. I don't listen to the lyrics so much. I catch a few phrases and that's it. So for me, the lyrics don't really have any meaning one way or another. It's the sound, the music, the quality of the voice. I think it's a great album. One thing that Wajima points out is the song Saigo no Bansan, Last Supper. He says that is a song he really felt like doing at the time. And I think it's one of the standout songs for being unusual in the Ningen Isu catalog, but I really like it. But he said, like, these days he would never write such a song, but at that time that's what he really wanted to do, and that's what he did. They then go on to talk about how over the course of their career they've always been searching for their sound, and Suzuki says he really didn't like his singing back in the early days, and it's only just now, after 30 years, he finally really feels comfortable with his voice. Which I think is funny, because when I listen to the old songs, I really love his voice anyway. But yeah, that's how he feels as an artist. And I think Wajima also backs that up by saying, doesn't matter any period in Ningen Isu's history, they have some great songs. I think most of us can agree with that. Now, the final point is that they decided to part ways with their management company. They said that they felt that the management company hadn't really been promoting them well enough. And that's probably part of the reason why their career was not really taking off after all those years. So they decided to go with an independent management company. I mean, a management company that could focus solely on promoting Ningen Isu and getting them out there. And it was around this time then that, as they were starting to put together ideas for the next album, Masahiro Goto said, guys, I'm out of the band. And he went off to do his own stuff with other bands, find his own way. And so, once again, Ningen Isu, Shinji Wajima, and Kenichi Suzuki were without a drummer. We'll find out what happened next. Nobu Nakajima had been part of the Ikaten scene way back in the late 80s. He had been playing for a band called Domingos. Ningen Isu were preparing material for their next album. They had already written a song called Dote. However, Masahiro Goto announced his departure from the band and they were left without a drummer once again. During this time, Shinji Wajima was invited to play lead guitar for a band called Anji during one of their live performances. And there is a YouTube video, I think on the Ningen Isu Reddit page, you can find the video link there. It was during this performance that Wajima met up with Nakajima and invited him to be the drummer on a single Ningen Isu album. That was the original plan, one album together for now. However, they brought Nakajima into the studio and introduced him to the new song Dote. They tried recording the music for the song, but they had a difficult time matching the song up with the music. The song was written for Suzuki to sing, and the key was a little bit high for him. Meanwhile, Nakajima, listening to the song, was thinking, I wonder how I would do if I could get a shot at it. Suzuki went off to a karaoke box to practice singing the song, And while he was there, he thought, I wonder how Nakajima would do singing this. So, finally, the offer was made to him. Why don't you try to sing the song? Which he did, and everyone was really pleased with his work. His vocals fit the song just right. The band was now recording in El Mundo Studios in Nerima in Tokyo. Wajima brought in a bottle of Nihonshu, a kind of Japanese alcohol, set up an ashtray, a cassette player, and made himself right at home. In fact, it wasn't long before they had turned the studio into almost like a one-room apartment. There was even a bathroom there, so if the need to stay overnight came up, they could make use of it. They had a really good time coming up with the new ideas, new songs, and putting the album together. And Wajima thought that somehow the new album should reflect the number 3. So, he gave it some thought and put 2 different ideas together. First of all, there was a story written way back in the early 1800s called Tokaido Dochu Hizakure. Now, the Tokaido is a route following the Pacific Ocean along Shizuoka, going up toward Mount Fuji. And Hizakure means to go steedless, without a horse. So basically walking or hiking. So the story was originally about 2 travelers following that route and the misadventures that they had. So Wajima took that idea and put it together with the Buddhist concept of the San-Akudo, the 3 routes to wickedness. Because as they were recording, they were usually drinking and later on walking home at night. And they would all the 3 of them would walk together until they parted ways to go off to their respective homes. And so Wajima was thinking, we're a rock band, we're drinking, staying up late. Maybe some of these things are, in some people's eyes, the roads to wickedness. So that concept was put together. The 3 roads to wickedness and the hiking on the route of the Tokaido, put them together, San-Akudochu Hizakure. So it was a perfect Ningen Isu title, combining the idea of the 3 band members with the number 3, San meaning 3, and borrowing something from literature. Suzuki's new song, Senrei, Baptism, was chosen for the single release and the video, and it was the first of his songs since Kaijin Nijumenso back in 2000 to be made into a video. And Suzuki reflects that having one of his songs picked every 4 years for the video is probably a pretty good track record. Wajima, however, says that the habit of staying up late and drinking and walking home late at night was probably a bad habit to get into, and the song Notare Jinni, Death by the Roadside, was exactly inspired by that. In fact, at one night he stayed up writing the lyrics for Ishugaeshi and decided he was going to write down the lyrics and send them off to Suzuki by fax. However, the fax that Suzuki received was entirely illegible and almost completely black, he said. It was more like receiving a curse by fax rather than lyrics. Apparently Wajima had been into the bottle a little bit too much. Anyway, the band felt they were off to a very positive start, and some of the song titles, such as Shinsei, Born Again, Senrei, Baptism, and Dote, Journey, reflect that feeling that the band is off to a new beginning and a new start. As for Nakajima, he said that during those times recording, he was always watching and trying to get a feeling for what was the unwritten understanding in the band about, who does what and who goes first and so on. But he said he didn't really get that kind of feeling. So he said for him, it was really refreshing to be in a band like Ningen Isu. Oh, and here it is. I forgot to hold up the CD. San-Akudochu Hizakurige. The first album with Nobu Nakajima on drums and vocals. It's the kind of rock we play, says Wajima. I like the blues, but there's Muddy Waters' Hoochie Coochie Man, and then there's Rick Derringer's Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo. He goes on to say that while it seems the voodoo term is an expression meaning to be intoxicated, he likes to think of how the word fits in as an expression for rock and roll, how the music can come over you and get you riding on the music. So he thought it would make a great title for an album, and then he thought to put some kanji to it to make it look cool. So of course we read it as Fuchiku, Fuchiku. Then he thought, let's have a little bit of fun with this album cover. So he told the album jacket designer to design it so that it goes in backwards from a usual CD. But it's kind of interesting because this is the way Japanese books typically are. You start from this end and flip over, like so. So that was neat. And then he asked the designer also to put a specific style of rabbit on, something that comes from what's called Choju Giga. Choju Giga means scrolls of frolicking animals, and it comes from a set of scrolls that are kept on the Kozanji temple in Kyoto. So these scrolls show images of monkeys and rabbits and other animals, and he wanted an image of a rabbit. Now in the book, when he's talking about this, he says he doesn't really remember why he wanted a rabbit. But then Suzuki says, well, I remember at the time you told me. It's because the rabbit tattoo was very popular around this time in near the end of the Edo period. It was often used by lower-ranking foot soldiers or also sometimes thugs to have a rabbit tattoo. And Nakajima goes on to say that it's not only that, but also like respectable fellows did not have rabbit tattoos. This was more like for playboys and vagabonds. The band showed up at the studio with lots of ideas for recording, and Wajima found out that Nakajima liked a manga author named Hino Hideshi. And Wajima also liked him and had actually based the song Genshoku no Koto on one of the stories written by Hino. That song also has a very long instrumental part, and Wajima says that he was looking for a kind of warm arpeggio with a strange feeling to it. And he found inspiration in the song Starless by King Crimson. The album also includes the song Fuwaku no Michi by Suzuki. Fuwaku means to be in your 40s, and if you recall, 10 years earlier, Suzuki had the song Sanjusai, 30 years old. So this was a song about becoming 40. And Suzuki says he is not going to write any more songs about reaching a new decade of life. And Wajima kind of jokes, well, you didn't write one when you turned 50, but if you had, it might have been something like, oh, my body's starting to break down. He said, but if people ask you, would you write a song about turning 60, maybe you could say like about how you got over your 50s. Nakajima also makes his songwriting debut on this album with Mujihi Naru Seishun, which is a kind of middle-aged person's frustration with young people, Seishun meaning youth. Wajima says that when Nakajima joined the band, he was always going, yay! Which you can see in a lot of interviews with him. And so this song was a chance for him to express his feelings very naturally. And you can hear in lines such as, Seishun no baka yaro. Baka yaro is like, stupid idiot. And kiechimae is like, get out of here, get lost. So it's a very fun song expressing Nakajima's natural feelings, I guess, and also in a kind of almost thrash metal context. Another song that Nakajima gets the lead vocal on is a song that Wajima wrote at his part-time job, and it's called Koritsu Muin no Shiso, rather a long title. But Wajima wrote a lot of songs actually while he was working at his part-time job, and he said that while he was writing that song, he thought, if I sing this, I'm going to put too much of my own feeling into it. So why not give it to Nakajima to sing? Which they did. And the interesting thing is they turned this song into an almost kind of 70s glam rock crossed with disco type feeling to it. So a very interesting song. Wajima says that after they turned 40, he felt that the band had really become tight. He thought the band had finally come to the point where they couldn't slip up. Although he does lament the passing of his youth, and he says that it would be nice to be able to have my youth one more time. However, the feeling with the band at this point, he says it was like we had rediscovered our youth. Incidentally, this is the band's first album with Tokuma Communications Japan. They were really excited about it. They had finally come over to a major label, not just a one-album deal, but they were signed with a major label. The chemistry with the band was really sharp. The feeling about writing the songs was going great. Things were really going well. All right, we have one more album to talk about, so let's move on to Manatsu no Yoru no Yume. Manatsu no Yoru no Yume. This was Ningen Isu's 14th album, and it was released in 2007, their second album on Tokuma Japan Communications. Wajima says that the album's title, of course, comes from Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream, and he felt that title was really appropriate because there was a very odd collection of songs on here with bizarre titles such as Soratobu Enban, which basically means flying saucer, and I think I actually read something in here that said it was based on an encounter Wajima had where he actually saw a flying saucer. He does have some peculiar stories, so maybe he did see one. Other songs, for example, Botan Doro Peony Lantern, which is actually based on a Meiji-era ghost story, which was in turn based on an old Chinese ghost story. Saru no Senban, which is a Nakajima song, basically a fleet of monkeys. Something inspired by Planet of the Apes, perhaps, or that reboot version with Mark Wahlberg, actually. It sounds a little bit like that when I listen to the lyrics. What was the other one? Himan Tenshi. The metabolic angel or obese angel. Funny thing about that song is that it was written by Suzuki, and he said it was basically inspired by his own experiences because he had really been gaining weight, he said. So, yeah, he wrote a song about an obese angel, thinking about his own health condition. In keeping with the kind of peculiar title, Wajima thought it would be a good idea to design the album cover like looking through a kaleidoscope, and you can spot the band members' photos scattered here and there. Wajima says during the recording of the album, almost every day after heading back home again, he wept with joy. He said just the feeling of going into the studio, recording for a major label, the chemistry in the band was going so well, and just all the songs were coming together. He said after all the struggles they had been through, he couldn't have been more happy. And many mornings when he showed up at the studio, Nakajima looked at him and said, "You cried again, didn't you?" But Wajima says, actually, we all cried because we had all been through this stage where we had been getting drunk at night and falling down on the roadside, but then getting up and getting over it. And he said that he read a lot of books and he learned to deal with a lot of his uncertainties or, I guess, personal frustrations and have a new outlook and appreciation for the world. And that really gave him a very positive look towards these recording sessions. And I'm going to put my own little thought in here, like just reading about the stories of the different albums. Of course, in the beginning, there's these, it's starting out, there's some adventures and some misadventures, but a lot of the times they went through a lot of struggles or a lot of difficulties, people leaving the band, recording sessions not going well, having a lot of problems. And I just feel that the last two albums from here on in, after Nakajima joined the band, it just seems that everything is now working out right. Everything is starting to work really well for Ningen Isu here in the latter half of the 2000s. So, Wajima had this feeling of being revitalized, and he said the recording sessions were really fun. Even in the case of one song where he felt they couldn't get the guitar sound really clear and nice, so they tried recording it different ways and did numerous takes, but still it was really fun recording the album. Suzuki struggled a little bit more because he had previously been working 6 hours a day at his part-time job and he was now working 8 hours a day, and he felt he had less energy or less inspiration to put into writing new songs. He had, of course, as he said, gained weight, but he also shaved his head by this time. He actually shaved it by the previous album, Fujiku. He also says his feelings about this album are not quite as positive because he wrote 3 of the songs. And as we heard previously with Shurabayashi, where he wrote 4 of the songs, he doesn't really feel his writing is very strong. he feels he can only write 1 or 2 strong songs per album, but he is particularly proud of Umi Monogatari. This is kind of funny because he said it was based on a pachinko machine series called Umi Monogatari. But in that case, the kanji for umi is sea. It is basically sea story or sea tales, tales of the sea, whatever. But the word umi in this case uses the kanji for pus. So this Umi Monogatari is basically like pus tales or pus stories. And of course, they use a lot of onomatopoeia in this song for how pus feels or looks, like nuru nurui. For this album, they actually brought a lot of older material, either riffs that they had written and hadn't been used in songs before, or even some older songs that had been never used before. And for example, in the song Yoru ga naku, the opening track, that part that goes da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da, that was actually a riff that Wajima wrote way back in '98, and Suzuki thought that's pretty cool if we can use it in a song somehow. So here it was, almost 10 years later, they finally had a song they could put it in. Another song, Hakujitsu Mu, basically Daydream. It was actually, or part of it was based on a song they did called Natsu no Hakaba, Summer Graveyard or Summer's Cemetery, something like that, from way back when, which actually never made it on an album. Then they also talk about the song Sekai ni Hanabata, Flower Bouquet to the World, basically. It reads like a letter. Wajima, the main part of the song, Wajima is reading out a letter written from a photojournalist who has gone to document a war on some southern islands. And he's writing to his family back home in Japan and describing what he sees there. And Wajima says it was actually a very difficult track for him to record as speaking. And Suzuki jokes it's because he was speaking in standard Japanese, basically Tokyo dialect Japanese, standard Japanese. And because they are from a part of Aomori that has a particularly strong dialect, they said people with that dialect were not meant for speaking standard Japanese. So they also said it's very difficult to do live. It's very hard to make it as a strong performance live. But Wajima suggests maybe if we did an acoustic version? So Suzuki says that his feelings about the album were not so good because he wrote 3 of the songs. And Nakajima actually said that in the beginning Suzuki said, I am writing just 1 song for this album. Okay. And then he came up with 3 and Nakajima was quite surprised. But Wajima says, like, if Suzuki said, all right, just why don't you write all the songs for the album, then that kind of puts Wajima on the spot. And Ningen Isu albums do need some songs written by Kenichi Suzuki. It's just necessary. And Nakajima points out, he says, the history of Ningen Isu is written with Kenichi Suzuki's name on page 1. Okay. So, those are the notes for Manatsu no Yoru no Yume. And this brings us to the end of 7 albums. The 7 albums I said I would talk about in part 2 of this video series. So I will get on to talk about the last 7 albums. I'm probably going to need another 2 or 3 weeks to get around to it. I thank everybody for your patience in waiting for this. I hope, once again, that I got all the information that I've told you about. I hope it's all correct. I did actually, while making this, I read one thing and I thought, that's kind of strange, and I read it again. That's funny that they would say that. And then I made the video where I said what I thought they said, and then the next day I read it again. I thought, oh my gosh, that's not what they said. They said this. Oh, holy cow, I have to re-record the video. Anyway, thanks for everybody. I'm doing this just because I want to share information about Ningen Isu in English, since a lot of you cannot read this, and even I am struggling through to read this. So I hope this is helpful. I hope people are enjoying it. And now I will sign off because I can feel my voice is getting kind of rough. Okay, I'll be back with the next video in a little while. Thanks again for watching, everybody. See you in the next Ningen Isu video.